I'm here as a secondary technical advisor.
You're live now, and so again, thank you for everyone who is watching today. I have today with me RJ. With who anybody who watches movie night or anything, anything dealing with evolution on that stuff. He's very knowledgeable on that, so that is why I brought him in more as a kind of to help correct things that I might not be the most knowledgeable on.
I will do my best.
I am going to be going through a video where a guy, by request of me, because I thought it would be good for a laugh, and he is, to go through a video of mine that I did labeled "Why Intelligent Design is Not Intelligent." Now, he cuts out a lot of my videos, so I'll have to try and fill in the blanks. And I do have my actual script that I use that I read off of for this video up and ready to go if I need to fill in any of the blanks on what was said. And if you want, you can find my the video on my channel. So yeah. And RJ, I just gave you a wrench in case you need to link any of your technical papers in that, what you might be referencing. So you can do that now. You should have a wrench now. But yeah, let's get going on this. Okay. I really don't even know what to call it.
It's a fellow trying to be funnier than he is and way more knowledgeable than he actually is.
Yeah. Now, for the record, I did invite him on to this live stream. He never responded back to me on that. I did tell him we would be live at this time, so who knows? He might join us in the chat. You never know. So
we'll be looking for it.
Here we go.
All right. This is Dr. Downard. Okay, so tonight, and you see in the previous video, there was audience feedback. This guy called Captain Brony sent me this big long comment with a big list of Bible verses that he doesn't understand.
Now, before I get going, he's claiming I do not understand. I actually was studying to go to seminary before I became an atheist. For anybody who wants to know a little my background, it was actually doing that study on the Bible and going through the Bible and learning it even more that actually led me to become an atheist. Now, he was making a bunch of bold assertions, and I decided to correct him on where his Bible, said he was wrong. I do have that video pulled up. I might look at it. Tonight. I don't know. We'll see how well this goes and how much stupid we can handle. So, yes, I do understand what those verses are saying. Funny thing is, he doesn't quite understand it himself. If you watch the video for that, you'll see it. But, yeah.
And pardon in advance for the fact that he's not the most easiest person to listen to in terms of intelligibility because of the manner in which he's talking. So It makes it awkward to try to parse what he needs. He needs subtitles. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Actually turn my volume up just a hair so it might be a little easier to hear him, because think about it, might be a little quiet because he is very quiet in his video. And so, yeah, we'll see how this goes.
This video explained those. So in this video, we're going to respond to the video that he linked us to about intelligent design. All the stuff, which is a list of all the stuff he doesn't understand about the human body.
Correction. I also, and what's funny is that he's saying I don't understand about the human body. Well, I do have someone who would. That's why I brought RJ on. But two, my video in question also deals with astronomy. Yeah, actually, Don, looking at the chat, I actually thought about using the Sesame Street song as an opening, but I was like, I don't want to fight copyright, because that's about the level of intelligence IQ we're dealing with. So, but I don't want to fight copyright. So yeah, I'm glad to see I wasn't the only one who was thinking that.
Now, well, that he is a young Earth creationist apparently, but he's using intelligent design jargon is a dangerous, slippery slope, because the chronology of young Earth creationism is incompatible with the chronology of an awful lot of the design arguments that are presented. And so we'll be finding out whether he bumps into that close enough for him to notice.
Yeah.
One big glaring design flaw is that of the red giant our sun will become in about 5 billion years. I mean, according to the Bible, God created the earth for us humans, and we are supposed to reign forever with him after the end times. Why would he make it a place where it won't last forever?
It says we will reign with him forever. It doesn't say that we can only reign on Earth.
I mean, either.
I deconverted man, and but on that, actually, since he's going into theology, which is my cup of tea, and it's really just a bad argument on his point, because what he's saying is, yes, it says heaven and earth shall pass away, and there shall be a new heaven and a new earth, and Israel shall come down from the sky as a bride for her husband, and that's in Revelation 21, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, good old John on acid.
And the thing on that is, almost every biblical scholar I can find that I've read. Now, if somebody has something other than that, please inform me. I would love to know if there is something other than that. But most everyone says that it is usually referring to the the earth being remade by God. So yeah, so we have that.
Yeah, it's fair to say that we have to put this back into the context of what Bible believers thought. They didn't have any clues to how old the universe was or how big the universe was. So all they knew is their local real estate, and all of the stuff that relates to the Bible is just a tiny little niche. They didn't know about China. They didn't know about Australia. They didn't know about anything. And they were trying to make up stuff as well as they could. Some of it was borrowed from the Babylonians. So the Genesis day creation sequence is borrowed from the Enuma Elish that they probably got during the Babylonian captivity. So they're thinking in terms of an earth made in the way the Babylonians thought of it. And then at some point down the line, when you get to Revelation, now that's filtered through centuries of evolution to where the Jews have crystallized their viewpoint, and they have a temple, and now they've gotten oppressed by people. Now they want to get rid of the Romans, and what you do there's a whole Messianic tradition. And then they fold that into the idea that this is a corrupt world. It's a bad one. It's been fallen because of Adam and Eve, and you got the post-flood thing that happened at some point they don't really think too much about. So now they're going to get a nice new version, right, in the nice shiny wrapper that's going to be made when Jesus comes back and sets up the kingdom. We're all going to live in this giant golden cube and all of that. And within that context, as fairy tale, as biblical epic, it's fine and dandy, but it has no merit scientifically or cosmologically. And especially so for young Earth creationists that have got to try to cram everything into their abrupt time frame.
Yep. So yeah, very, very true on there, RJ.
God is an idiot, or he's lying.
Just because we don't understand something is not a reason to jump to the blind, unsupported conclusion of God not existing.
Oh, no. You make the claim of God, you have to prove God. You don't prove God. Yeah, I take the default position of the I don't believe you, the null position. So please, I mean, he doesn't, but please prove you God. I will wait for that.
Yes, and as Laplace is said to have said to Napoleon when he showed him his new works, which corrected Newton and got it super duper accurate to account for all the planetary motions in the early 19th century. And supposedly Napoleon looking at it and saying, I don't see any mention of God here. And Laplace is said to have said, oh, we have no need of that hypothesis.
Yeah.
I mean, in about 4 billion years, the Andromeda Galaxy will collide with the Milky Way. Now, if you're a designer, you will look for that in your drawings before you finalize it and build it. A massive design flaw that a all-knowing and all-powerful God should have foreseen, but did not foresee it, so what can I say? So yeah, two very glaring design flaws in his so-called perfect design.
Unless there is a reason they're supposed to collide. Let's use our brains and think about how it would benefit us if our galaxies collided. What would the benefits be? Okay, so there's a ton of asteroids flying around that threaten the planets, including Earth. So if our galaxies collide, there will be more stars. More stars means more gravity, and more gravity to pull away asteroids, you know?
Oh dear,
Yeah.
stop this
Yeah.
poor little kid on this one. Yeah,
I
I
was
had
going
to
to stop there.
comment.
Go ahead, RJ. I got something else to say, but you go ahead and take it first.
Yeah, the first order of business is the reason why the thing that prevents asteroids from slamming into the Earth is essentially Jupiter. It has nothing whatsoever to do with any other star system. The nearest star is so far away, its gravitational effects are absolutely negligible. Even during a galactic collision, the average stars out in our neck of the woods are unlikely ever to be bumping into any other stars. They're so far apart. I made the point on there that if our solar system were thought of as about the size of a football field, the nearest star system is another football field about 300 miles away. It's just ridiculously far distances. So the poor kid has no clue that colliding galaxies, to the extent that they produce more debris, which they wouldn't change the mass anything at all, and they would have no effect whatsoever on the odds of a local asteroid in our Oort cloud or anywhere else bumping into us. So this guy is flunking out on cosmology. Plus, if he's a young Earth creationist, how can we see Andromeda Galaxy at all? Because it's 2 million light years away. Therefore, the light hasn't hit us yet, unless you try to do weird ad hoc explanations, which creationists are constantly trying to figure out why it is we see the universe at all, instead of seeing a boundary at 6,000 light years.
RJ, I can answer that. I can answer that. Don't you know that light moved faster earlier on?
Yeah, they just speed up C, which has a tiny problem because of that E equal MC squared part. And
Yeah.
there's like a, in the old days, there was there still is the Messiah of the Month Club, you know, the Beast of the Apocalypse edition, where there's constantly some new end of the world popping up. Well, the same thing comes in young Earth creationist camp, trying to figure out how they can cram cosmology into that 6,000 year time frame. And they come up with some ad hoc idea, and then it's pointed out sometimes by their own crowd. They've even shot their own arguments down at times where they notice, uh-oh, this won't work. And so they move on to another one, and they're never going to make it fit because the universe isn't 6,000 years old.
Yeah, and what I find funny is with the Andromeda Galaxy coming into the Milky Way, making the Milkdromeda, I think is what it's going to be referred to as.
We'll let whoever is there billions of years from now.
That's what I was referring to. But so that's what the point was, and that's what it's referring to is the part where he, where they're going to collide, is that brings another problem because he's saying, oh, that will help us with our asteroids that we have if it moves that, which it won't, because that's a laughable claim in itself. But you know what that's doing? That's bringing in quadrillions and quintillions and all kinds of other metric tons. I mean, sorry, RJ, for this language here, but it brings in literally no other way to put it.
Billions and billions. Yes. You got to go Carl Sagan on us. We all got to do our Carl Sagan impression.
Yeah. It's debris, dust, rocks, asteroids flying in at us.
From what I've even the section that I heard briefly when you introduced me to this, and we'll be getting to in due course, he comes up with ad hoc explanations for things. Because he's an inerrantist, the Bible can never be wrong on anything. It must accommodate all of science and nature and history. So it all has to be consistent, or the science and nature and history is wrong. And so he can't really argue there isn't an Andromeda Galaxy. So he got to think that there's some master plan out there. That's the reason why there are volcanic eruptions and mass extinctions and supernova and colliding galaxies and black holes sucking stuff in. And it's a theodicy issue, which nobody bothered about up until recently because they had no clue that the universe was that big. And that only came within my lifetime, practically. They were just starting to figure out the big universe in the 1920s, and it was really starting to kick into high gear in the 60s and 70s.
Yeah. But I got to answer Deconverter Man on something what you said, and also when you said also the sun might be gone by then. No, it will stick around for about another billion years because it will go after 5 billion.
Our sun's about middle aged. It's got another 5 or 6 billion years left in it.
From what I can
What's
find,
the big problem? The universe itself, if it continues expanding, the problem there, trillions of years in the future, if there is still a trillions of years, is that the universe will have expanded so much that the space will have attenuated so much that the strong nuclear force can no longer hold atoms together. And that means that all of matter in the universe, whatever it was up to up until then, turns into a bouillabaisse of what? And maybe that goes into a weird quantum fluctuation and generates a new universe. We don't know, but that's a long ways down the road, way after your insurance has lapsed.
Yeah, very much. So so his argument of it helps avoid asteroids is also bringing in a metric fuck ton of all kinds of dust, debris, and asteroids that now our galaxy has to deal with. Now we're so small and insignificant in this galaxy that we probably wouldn't even really. It probably won't affect us. I mean, he's acting like our sun is the center of our entire galaxy. Is almost now. I don't know if that's what he is believe.
Well, we don't know what he thinks, and I'll bet you he doesn't know what he thinks.
It's like, I mean, RJ, does it not come across that he thinks the way he's arguing it's the sun is the center of the galaxy? I mean, it's no, that's not.
He thinks about these issues in the way the old Lost in Space show dealt with star systems and galaxies. They would often use the word galaxy to refer to star systems. They would think that things are way closer than they really are. But the distances involved are so gigantically large. You know, when you think about how far away 2 million light years is, how big across the galaxy is that's 100,000 light years across, and how when you now get down to the little point scale of what's going on in our local neighborhood, they're on a completely different scale. Now, when you get closer to the center of a galaxy where the black holes are, you have much higher density. You can find stars that are only a billion miles from each other. They're just cheek and jowl at that point. But out here in the low rent suburbs, 5 or 10 light years distance between stars is fairly typical. We happen to be 4.5 light years away from our nearest neighbor. At the scale that we're looking at, that means that there's way more empty space than there is stuff in the actual solar system. And even in our own solar system, Isaac Asimov once joked that the solar system consists of Jupiter plus debris. And that's quite correct. That if you look at it from a mass point of view, we're just tiny little dot specks in there. So I don't know that our little weird Dr. Mustache guy has any really clear conceptions of the scale of things or the chronology of things. If he's a young Earth creationist, he doesn't know the chronology of things.
Yeah. And I don't know if this guy's a Poe. If he is, he's a darn good one just because he does this kind of stuff all over his channel. So it's,
if he's not an idiot, he's doing a remarkably good impression of one.
Yeah. That's why I said, and again, I've learned never underestimate the stupidity of a human.
That's H.L. Mencken's approach. Yeah. No one ever lost a dime underestimating the intelligence of the American public, he said back in 1920, and it still holds true.
Yeah. So he might be a Poe, but I've learned just to take him at face value until they admit they're a Poe.
I do too. I assume everybody is honest, and whatever they say, no matter how gobsmackingly stupid, I'm assuming they really believe it. And until you can find a situation where they actually admit that they know they're just making up this shit to get the money or whatever, or just to act as a snarker, fine and dandy. But other than that, I'm going to assume you are honest, and then I'm going to rake you over the coals, because if you say stupid, you're stupid.
Yep, exactly.
Next up, we have the human body as proof of God being a pretty incompetent designer. First off, let's look at our respiratory system. Okay, not a bad design. We breathe in, it goes to our lungs, sounds good. And if you don't believe me, take a deep breath in and let it out. You're going to breathe. Now let's look at our digestive system. Okay, again, seems to work pretty well. And let's look at them both combined together. Oh, I see a master design flaw. Who would have saw that? Now, the flaw in question is that if you breathe while eating, it can lead to choking. Because we both swallow and breathe through the same tube, the esophagus. Now, obviously, there's breaks in there that take air down to the lungs and the esophagus goes to the stomach. But overall, it is not that good of a design. It is theoretically the same tube. It goes in your throat and then it separates.
Fact check. Humans don't breathe and eat out through the same tube. We breathe through the larynx and we swallow through the esophagus. So if you inhale while you're swallowing, it's not God's fault if you choke.
RJ?
Yeah, that's one where the point is there are flaps in normal animals, everybody but us, that kind of prevent the choking bit. And it's true even for primates. What happened in human evolution is, in order to go upright, and particularly the morphing of the skull to adjust for the fact that we talk, and we have a much more complicated breathing mechanism for speaking purposes, that has meant that normal flap system that comes into play doesn't for us, and it doesn't seat properly, and that's why we can swallow stuff down the wrong tubes and choke on ourselves. Now, if you're arguing that all of human things are beautifully designed, this is a peculiar design defect, and there are all sorts of things going on in our biology that seem peculiarly designed. But I don't think our little Dr. Mustache is ever going to acknowledge any of that stuff or give source citations for everything. Everything must have been perfect and wonderful, and anything that goes wrong can never be God's fault. It has to be me, in which case God is the Donald Trump of heaven.
Yeah. And one point I did say this in a comment too. I said, but I find it funny you think baby's choking is the baby's fault, responding to his video here when I did this. And he says, searches for point in video where I said baby's choking is funny. I never said that. I said, okay, where did I say that it was funny? I said I found it funny. You think that them choking is their fault, and wow, you are dishonest. And he goes, no, RJ, you might be able to talk on this a little bit better, but yeah, he goes, even babies should have the common sense to know not to inhale while you're eating. It's a natural instinct.
No, what you're doing is perfectly normal. It's like the difference. I have a tendency that people marvel at it, that I can talk and breathe at the same time. Well, it's because I breathe through my nose a lot. So that's another dynamic that connects up in the thing. But the biology of why we can choke to death and why chimpanzees don't has to do with the way our larynx has mutated over time to adapt to language production. And it requires a much more complex system of sound things and tongue flapping to make the highly specialized sounds that we do in language. And there's quite a lot of technical literature on this point, which I have sneaking suspicion Dr. Mustache has not looked at.
Yeah, and now for a little clarification here, so I do have my my original script of this up. I will read what he cut out. I basically, I'll just give you kind of the summary. I said, if I talk about if a drafter presented me to that, I would tell him to obviously fix the flawed eating and breathing issue. I point out that it would not be that hard to put a new line in for breathing for it to go directly to our lungs. And that, I said, but I guess God finds it funny. This was a difference, and more as an insult to him. I said, but no, God, I guess, finds it funny when we choke and die on his own design flaw, as why else would he not fix it or somehow corrected it? I mean, he is God. He can do anything, right? Well, anything but build what we humans can make and actually function systems without glaring flaws in return. Just for the record of what he cut out, where I point out where a designer would not allow that. And because guess what? You have a mistake in a design. Oh, go ahead, RJ.
Yeah, this is the fundamental flaw. I did a whole chapter on intelligent design, creationism light in my tip website, where I go into this whole point about what qualifies as good or bad design. And there are lots of examples also at the molecular and biological level where things actually are functioning okay, but they can easily mutate in ways that produce disasters. Our immune system can suddenly turn on us on a dime, and that's what leukemia is. Are these not design defects in the biology? If you think of it as a design system, I call it the Titanic iceberg problem. No one would ever attribute any theodicy issues, and fancy little word just in case people aren't aware of that, theodicy, which is the notion of good or bad things that gods do, and whether or not bad things that gods do is bad or not. So there's a whole subculture of theological speculation and discussion on that. But anyway, an iceberg, there's no moral turpitude to an iceberg. It's just being an iceberg. But everything about the Titanic, the moment you attribute it to design, which it obviously was designed by people, now everything about it is evaluatable morally as to whether or not the designs are good or bad. The failure to put enough lifeboats, the failure to give the people enough binoculars to look at. All of those now become matters of morals. And if you're going to attribute anything in biology to design, you get open that doorway to view whether or not the design is a good or a bad design, a worthy or clever design, or one that has stupid defects to it that you could sue God for design defects if a human being designs such a malfunctioning system.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't know if he said already, he might have with the Galaxy one. Like I said, his stuff is just you know, some of his other.
Yeah, Deconverted brings up a good point about in the live chat. God could have made a universe that allows for infinite energy, and we wouldn't need to consume anything or breathe for energy or have a blood system at all. And that, in other words, it's begging a big fundamental question: why are we made of matter? Why do we have cells? Why do our cells have mitochondria? Why do the mitochondria have their own DNA rather than use our DNA? Why do we have DNA at all? Do we have to have DNA? Do we have to have proteins? Do we have to be made of carbon? All of these are issues that ultimately, the reason why we are the way we are is because we're evolved primates. We're metazoans. The living biological systems do things, and we can trace their lineage all the way through, and we can see the reason why we have particular problems occasionally and other animals may have problems in their line is because of the contingencies of our history. That's a word that I hope everybody makes a great deal of use to, is contingency, rather than the idea of nature versus nurture and a spectrum. There's also the moment of how things have to play out where there are options available and things can go in varying ways depending upon circumstances. Well, we got stuck with a bunch of different things that occurred because of the way our biological and evolutionary history developed. And the reason why we have an ability to choke is not because some designer god made a mistake. It's because we evolved in a fresh way that opened up opportunities for really useful things. Our ability to speak the way we do is a fabulously powerful tool, and it overrides the fact that once in a while some of us choke to death.
Yep. Yeah, and that's, a lot of things on there. And like I said, he argues, I think it's with the Galaxy one, I think I already might have made it. I don't know. It's just so stupid. Some of it's just like going, oh, God. But when he points out, or he might be saying it, so I'm just going to pre-say it now, well, how can you say this? You don't know the original design. Well, okay, I don't have the original blueprints of the Kansas City Skywalk in front of me, but I can look at it and go, yeah, that was a bad design because 100 some odd people died. Literally, in design work, mistakes cost lives. Literally. That's a perfect.
Ironically, of course, we do have a lot of the blueprints. We have blueprints for our human species, and we have the ones for Homo erectus, and we have the ones for Homo neanderthalensis, and we have them for Homo habilis, and we have them for the Australopithecines, and we have the developmental biology and the genetics of living organisms, and we even have some of the DNA from Neanderthals. So, yeah, we do have a lot of the blueprint data, and increasingly we can go through and retro-engineer or calculate and observe how variations in the available DNA accommodate and account for why we have the variations we do. And we can see it in practice. We can identify why certain people in high altitudes have become adaptable to low oxygen levels. And we can see the genes that do that. We can see why sickle cell anemia traits have popped up. They're always in cultures independently. The main group are Black Americans, but quite a few other groups have independently developed comparable mutations, because any mutation of that type will insulate you from malaria. Malaria kills you faster than the sickle cell will. So that's why those bad mutations are good within that context. All of that's explainable by the evolution and the genetics, of which Dr. Mustache apparently isn't aware of.
Yeah. And RJ, since you said it, I gotta go with the I gotta make this joke here. You said erectus. Sorry.
Yes, Homo erectus. Yes. All we need to do is to have Homo erectus and the planet Uranus all in the same discussion, and we can make little juvenile 10-year-old minds just go like Beavis and Butthead.
Yep. I'll admit it, I'm mature, so yeah. But
well, I used to be immature, but now I'm an old fart, so I've grown up past it.
You're never too young to be a kid and immature. But yeah, back to the idiot.
Next, we have the recurrent laryngeal nerve, and I'm sorry if I mispronounced that. Laryngeal, LRYNGEAL. So you're wanting to look it up. There it is, the RNL. Now, what is the RNL exactly? What is it exactly, you may ask? Well, I will tell you. It is a nerve that runs from the brain to the larynx. Now I can already hear you asking, okay, well, Cap, how is that such a bad design? Well, it's because it runs from the brain down around the heart and back up to the larynx. Now, the larynx is at the front of the throat. So it takes a long detour down your throat, around your heart, or down from your heart, and up into your throat. So, yeah, that's what would be a bad design. Well, that, as I said, it's a pretty horrible design. I mean, a more streamlined way to do that would be to take it and run it from the brain directly to the larynx.
Now think about it. It's a nerve. What do nerves do? They send messages. The body is being hurt. Nerves carry messages between the brain and the heart to signal an SOS and causes you to react. For example, when you bump your head, you instantly start rubbing your head because your nerves have communicated an SOS for you to react to it before any further damage is done. So this nerve that goes through the brain and the heart and lungs and the larynx is very important, because consequently it will hurt much more, because those are vital organs, and you will react quicker and more force than any other your miscellaneous body parts.
And I will say something real quick.
Dear me, wow.
Yeah.
This is, I can detect he's making this shit up as he goes along. And again, I suspect he's probably never read any of the technical literature on it, but that the extreme example that's used often has to do with the giraffe. We're a minor league example, but the giraffe has a really long neck. And so you get stuff that goes really long and around because of that variation. We know how this took place, because when those nerves originally developed in fish a long time ago, next to the various pharyngeal arches, it's a short distance. It was direct wiring in those days because it was a very natural development to do. But because one of the nerves was on one side of a bone and the other one was on the other, as over millions of years and adaptations in tetrapods, that connection stayed in place. Developmental biology is very conserved, and you can't rewire it on the fly. So it gets stuck with whatever it's got at. And as the body has morphed around and the skulls have changed and the vertebrae are forming and all of this has happened, the connection from the brain to down to the heart and other spots stayed in place But now they're farther and farther removed, and it has to follow the track, and it goes around whatever has developed in between. That's why one of the nerves is a short one, and the other one is really, really long, because of all the evolution that's happened ever since. The evolutionary lineages explains that peculiarity, and the creationist, well, all he can do is just go, well, nerves send signals. Well, duh.
Yeah. And RJ, I have a question. Did you get a hold of my script somehow and know exactly what he cut out? Because I go,
well, no, but it doesn't surprise me. In other words, he's cherry picking his responses and avoiding the data he can't account for. And I can flash a Tortugan alert because of that.
Yeah, because literally the part he cut out of my script, because like I said, I have my actual script that I use for this video up to make sure that I can point out what is said. I go, so where could this be a real problem? Oh yeah, in a giraffe. I mean, have you seen their necks? They have it in. They have their nerve run from the brain down their neck, around their heart, then back up. Yeah, that is a pretty horrible design because again, the longer the nerve, the longer it takes to send the signal. So the most ideal way would be going straight from on a giraffe, which would only be a couple inches, like maybe a foot tops, instead of like 8 feet to run down around the heart and then back up. It doesn't.
You get stuck with what you get stuck with, and nature can only build upon what it already has in existence. That's why some things occur in some lineages and not in others, whereas a designer can put anything anywhere. The reason why all automobiles today have intermittent windshield wipers is because they're a really good idea and everybody copies them. So everybody can use them. Whereas if cars were an evolved lineage, the only ones who would have intermittent windshield wipers would be ones that had developed them naturally and could inherit them, or the possibility of a convergent development where you'd look and see, and the biology and the mechanisms would probably be very, very different, even though they're performing the same kind of function. So we can see that living systems show exactly the features design systems don't. And the design system features that we see are exactly not what you see in living systems.
Exactly. Yeah. So carrying on with the next.
I'll just put in one little blip of an example that always intrigued me, and I put it into Evolution Slam Dunk, had to do with platypus teeth. Why platypuses have no teeth? It turns out that they become adapted heavily to electrosensing in very murky water. And what they eat doesn't really require teeth anymore. And it turns out that the nerve system that has been developed and become so powerful to do their electrosensing travels across the spot in the jaw where the roots of teeth form. And it's crowded them out. And so the teeth can't develop, they can't get rooted. So there's an adaptational selection pressure in favor of the electrosensing and disfavoring the teeth. And so platypuses have no teeth.
Okay, I don't want to think about that bit there, Deconverted, man. I'm sorry. That's wow. And I'm
oh, car sex? Well, yes, indeed. You know, there you go. And the problem that European cars were having with American cars, you know, because one of them's metric and the other one isn't, is just really strange on there. But that's the point, is that one of the fundamental ideas that everybody who wants to understand evolution needs to do, it's not necessarily involving just biology. Anything that reproduces and sends along inheritable mutations can function as a Darwinian system. That's one of the lessons that Richard Dawkins would give. And so if you add, for those of you who've seen that stupid Ray Comfort movie, one of the ones that he did where he brings out a book and shows people about the design book and how there's no changes in the books. Well, if books mated and generated copies that have heritable mutations so that one book is no longer the same as its ancestors, Darwinian principles would apply. It would do it automatically. You can't avoid it. And the same thing goes with biological systems, whereas, you know, Mr. Mustache doesn't seem to understand that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just, but yeah. We now go on to the next bit, and I'll put in my joke that he so rudely cuts out. This is a darn good joke, too, I thought. So, yeah, you guys will get to hear it.
Now, another design flaw we can find in embryology, which is the study of how embryos and other animals develop. Now, this design flaw, it's not really, you won't notice it if you look at another human, but actually, the next two I mentioned, you won't notice if you look at another human. But first one is we have tails when we develop. Now, why do we develop with a tail? It's pointless. And if I was to design the
tail you are.
I am going to call it right now before he even starts. And RJ, sorry for kind of maybe stepping on your toes here a little bit, but he is flat out. Now, the next point, when we talk about the next point, I will point out why he is flat out lying and full of BS. Because with this is not what I'm referring to. Not even close. And it's shown in, I mean, we have a actual physical tail during development. We lose it, but we start with it. I mean, you get bones going down from the spine into the tail. And then
they've even identified all the gene structures for them. They get dissolved vestigially very early, although you do find examples of where some of the gene systems involved in that still kick on occasionally, and there are ones that form the fleshy tail projections that pop out and makes things very awkward for them, and they have to have it surgically removed. We never formed them, particularly as the adults, because a lot of the connecting genes have shut off in the meantime, and so they don't ever connect back in. But yeah, the reason why we look embryologically the way we do is because we're vertebrates and we develop from the primates. Darn it all.
Yep. And now, this is where he cut out my joke, and then I'll go back to him giving his wrong explanation for what I had said, because he obviously doesn't even understand what is being said. I go, I mean, it seems pretty pointless. If I was to design stuff, I would only have them develop only what they need. But a tail, why does, now this is where my bad joke was, and which he cut out, and which is really rude. You don't cut people's jokes off. I go, but a tail, why does he give us a coat as well? Then we can be wearing coats and tails. Okay, all bad jokes aside, it makes no sense, and it should not be there. That was what was in my original script. He cut out my bad joke.
And it's not just that. An example I really love is tooth enamel genes. You know that little platypus that has no teeth still has tooth enamel genes. All toothless mammals and all mammals that have teeth but no tooth enamel still have tooth enamel genes. Baleen whales have tooth enamel genes. Why? Because they've been disconnected in their evolutionary line, but there are processes. There's no immediate cleanup crew that removes pseudogenes. So those things can stay along for a real long time. And since a lot of these things have evolved recently, like in the last 50 million years, there's not been enough time to adjust some of these things.
Yeah.
Why would a designer put tooth enamel genes on an animal that has no teeth? That's like putting a gas tank on a Tesla.
Yep. Yeah. It makes, again, it makes no sense from a design perspective, but they don't understand this. They're like, well, you can't, you're from a design perspective, you want the designer. Yeah. I can look at crap and realize if it's designed. I have to do this for a living, especially when I get done with my 4-year degree. I will be doing even more of it for a living, because I'm going to give all the instructions to the drafters and say, hey, we need this done. Then I'm going to have to look at it and go and find out where they are freaking stupid and give them back all the red line work.
Yeah, there's going to be some questions there about the gills that are coming up, and we're going to be covering that, because the hilarious thing is this poor little Dr. Mustache really does think that he knows about biology when it's so painfully obvious he doesn't.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, it is. I love the description, because it goes, thank you, Cat Brony, for requesting this video. It was really fun to make. I love biology.
Whatever it is he loves, biology ain't it.
Yeah, exactly. If he loves biology, then I am the Queen of Sheba. And last I checked, I'm not a queen.
Anyway, let us proceed with the little fellow as he hoists himself on so many petards of his own making.
He'll argue something that has nothing to do with what I was even arguing, so this whole point is completely invalid.
referring to is called the flagella. The flagella is how cells travel. It's how they swim and move around. This is important for when humans are developing inside the womb so they can swim away from harmful bacteria. And it works well until the embryo grows its legs, you know?
Another.
Whoa.
Yeah.
You know, it sounds like he's mushed together a couple concepts. Like he took Michael Behe's Darwin's Black Box, ran it through a blender, and the stuff that came out, he took little snippets of it and rearranged some paragraphs at random. Because is he thinking that human embryos have flagella?
I was wondering that. I'm like, does he not? I mean, that's not even us. It's really, like I said, this guy is laughable. I mean, it's just, there's no other way to put it. He is laughable. His arguments are so
we know when he gets on with the stuff about the gills, that he just is riffing off stuff that he has no idea how far away he is from even creationist literature. It was clear he doesn't even read creationist crap.
Yeah. And that's what makes me wonder if he might possibly actually legitimately be a Poe, or is he just this freaking stupid? My guess is he's probably this stupid. Again, I've learned never underestimate the stupidity.
Never underestimate the stupidity of people. There's no limit to the capacity of people to believe absolute twaddle in the history of the universe. And we have great abilities to be incredibly brilliant, but Tortukans can be unbelievably stupid.
Yeah, I might have to go to I think it was Andy who did this last movie night. And it's hard to believe that this guy is in the same species category as Neil deGrasse Tyson.
And Da Vinci.
Edward Hubble, Da Vinci. Yeah, name any famous, really brilliant guy. Yeah, it's hard to believe he's in the same, classification as him. Yeah. And I'm sorry for everyone who is watching. Just, please don't hate me for, using those names in the same sentence as him.
Yeah. But you know what's so revealing about this guy is if we were talking about somebody from the 14th century who would have no access to relevant information, or even somebody as late as the 1980s, when a lot of information wouldn't necessarily be readily accessible unless you had a college education and went to libraries and read through the science books and blah, blah, blah. It's 2018. It's literally mouse click away world.
Yeah.
That absolutely nobody has an excuse for that level of stupid in this modern period other than absolute ignorance and laziness.
Yeah, and he tries to argue it, so he had to have done some sort of looking because he got charts. But
he found a chart that he got off of Pinterest or wherever the hell some of the little picture sites that you pick up stuff. But you got to understand what you see before you try to fire the ammo to find out whether or not you're trying to put an arrow into a Colt 45.
Yeah. It's, it is, like I said, he is absolutely laughable in his own right, and it is, but yeah.
Let him proceed to the discussion of the gills.
Yeah. Yeah.
We can't make this shit up. This is amazing.
Is that I will refer to them as gill pouches, but they are actually the proper term is pharyngeal pouches. And again, I'm sorry to anyone who knows biology and human anatomy better than me and for completely obliterating that name, and I'm sorry for that. But yes, we humans have vestigial gill pouches. I mean, when we develop later on, they become part of the ear, but they develop the same way fish develop gill slits. And this is found in mammals, birds, reptiles, fish. All different things have this. Now, why would we have that? I mean, any designer worth their salt would be knowledgeable enough to know you only put in what you need, nothing extra into a drawing. Because the more you put in, the more can go wrong, which would be a pretty bad design.
Gills in humans
Wait, no, I'm not sharing. Never mind. You'll have to go to the video on this. I'll post the video so you guys can see it if you want to see it in context. But
he put up
and
an
the
illustration of a relatively rudimentary illustration that pointed out where the gill arches are. They were kind of accented in pink. And it showed some from some basal vertebrates. And I think it had a bird up there and a human being, if I remember. Right. And it was very, very basic stuff, the kind of stuff that you would put in a very general article. We know that the technical literature is way more advanced than that these days.
Yeah. And with that, even in the photo, it shows the tails in human that we know what they do. We know that. And that was the tail I was referring to. So his own picture.
Yeah, it was actually showing the very thing he was denying. The other fun part, you got to let him talk on about the little gills in the embryos, in human embryos. This is where he was already edging out to the edge of a very long gangplank, and then he swan dives right into the empty pool.
Yeah, just all right. Anyone who's watching, I cannot be held responsible for any stupidity you may hear, and for any damage to your brain cells from the stupidity that you hear.
He gets held responsible for what you're about to hear.
Yes. I don't know how he thought this was even a brilliant idea in its own right. It's laughable, as I said. And I'm not using that just to use it. RJ, is this claim laughable?
It is laughable.
Exactly. Here we go. I'm sorry for the stupidity.
Are left over from when we were embryos in the womb. Embryos swim and they have to breathe, just like tails. They have to have tails to swim, and they also need gills to breathe because they're swimming and stuff. You know. All right. So that's basically the whole video.
I'll just stop it there because he just goes, "That's the whole video."
Yeah,
you know.
I was just gobsmacked at this because the irony is, and I pointed it out in my comment on his video site. I was saying, excuse me, but creationists have been beating everybody over the head about the fact that we don't have gills at any stage in our embryological development, and that a few would they misrepresented to suggest it was, but embryology, developmental biology, no, not even Haeckel claims that we have gills. And sometimes people will refer, they'll talk about gill arches, and some of them would mistakenly think that meant gills. The pharyngeal pouches or pharyngeal arches, there's about 3 or 4 of them, and they look like little banded zones in the embryos. And each one of those went its own way in generating what produced novelty in the vertebrates later on. And so jaw structures and ear structures and skull structures are developing, and we can trace that through the early placoderm fishes and into the rhipidistan fishes and into the early tetrapods. And so there's an enormous amount of stuff going on, plus the developmental biology that we can see in actual living organisms in their embryologies. At no point is there ever a thing where there's this little human embryo down in the womb with a tail and little gills swimming around like a little fish, all on its own. No, all of its nutrients are coming from the umbilical. They're amniotic vertebrates. There's no gills involved in that, but we still have the arches. And it would be as if that you had imagine if you had a self-replicating car that starts from a pile of raw materials and generates a thing. And in the course of its embryology, before it becomes a fully operational car, there was a stage in which it had the place where you attach horses to, and another little section where there was a crank on the engine, and all of that is in effect reflecting stuff that had happened in its production history, not in the finished car. Well, that's the sort of stuff that we're seeing in our living organisms, and that's the reason why we have pharyngeal arches, because when the development is forming, those things are forming just as they did in all of our ancestors. They don't generate the gill structures because those sections have gotten sided off to where we don't produce gills at all in our biology, and so they're still there as vestigial features that are carrying on additional functions. And so here he thought he could riff off of a picture that he doesn't understand, hallucinating properties of the embryo that are completely false, that don't even match up with creationist arguments, let alone the actual biology.
Yeah.
And we're supposed to take this guy seriously
Yeah,
with that
especially
mustache.
This comment is so great. It says, or more, it was a response to your part where you pointed that out. It goes, or more realistically, embryos have gills to swim around inside the womb, and we still have them as adults. Yeah.
Yeah, I stroke my little gills here on the side of my neck all the time. Right.
Yeah, I am just still
So you
trying to
think I am an
figure
axolotl?
that one. Like I said, that's why I think he might be a Poe, but
He would be
there's
consistent
so-
with that. At the very least,
Yeah.
he's a guy who doesn't understand the subjects he thinks he does and is trying to make up quick on the fly apologetic responses and hoping that nobody's going to notice.
Yeah, except we do.
Yeah, I'm afraid he's lost that battle.
Yeah, he's just like I said, it's almost laughable. Like I said, he had another video that, you know, just that he has that I was gonna go around. Might not. I don't know. I might do it at another point where he goes over the Bible verses I sent him, which is just so wrong. I might say that for next time I do a live stream.
Yeah, well,
unless you
what's
want to join
fascinating, from my methods direction, I was sorry that he wasn't going to be joining us in our discussion, so that we could actually have an exchange about his source argument, get him outside the mustache and have him actually talk about stuff generally, because I would be intrigued what source base he was drawing off of. What information was he just scavenging stuff off the internet? Has he ever bothered to read a science paper in his life? Has he ever had any science courses? These are all the different details that would go into things. And if he's a young Earth creationist, does he restrict himself to that kind of detail or not? How does he deal with source fact checking? All of that would be relevant stuff to come up. And everybody has to cover that kind of an argument. Too much of what goes on in discussions these days are dueling web posts, where people are just lobbing material back and forth. But ultimately, there's a data field out there, and everybody should be able to document stuff and find out what material are. And this poor schnook, holy moly, I don't know what he thinks he was trying to do here.
I mean, I'll say this. I sent him the link for him to do the video just so I could have some cheap laughs, and I'll say he didn't disappoint. You know?
Yeah, and because he was putting on the mustache and trying to affect a sort of, I guess this is what he thinks a pompous scientist is supposed to sound like. I'm not sure what. So he was making it hard for him to understand. And the fact that he was just riffing off of excerpts from your discussion and conveniently and suspiciously leaving out the parts he didn't want to talk about that were actually the substance end, missing the point all the time. Either he's a very tactically snarky apologist, or he's an idiot Poe who deserves to have his butt spanked for wasting people's time.
Yeah, it's you know, like I said, at least he was good for a few laughs, and yeah, I'm thinking I might not do the other part, the other video he has. I might say that for another time with maybe someone
what
else.
you might actually put out is a challenge to him that he is so gobsmackingly stupid that either he is a complete time waster, because even by creationist standards he's failing, or he's an idiot Poe who's therefore it's a waste of our time, because if you're trying to say stuff that you don't really believe but just to stir up trouble, the world is too important. The time is too short in our lives. We're facing real challenges of real people who are having really stupid decisions in government and science and other areas that are affecting people's lives. The stuff to pull back efforts on climate change. All of these things are real issues that this idiot is a time waster on.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the thing was he the video that we actually got in a fight was actually one that he did on Apologia. So I went in and watched that. I was laughing.
Oh, I would take on Apologia at your arm's length risk. I mean, Paul is very careful and witty and very effective. He does really marvelous stuff. I admire his material a great deal. He got on the source methods bandwagon all on his own. I've goosed up his method just a bit. He's made use of my material, but basically he got the idea all on his own, as most people who do source methods did all on their own. They go follow the source. It's the equivalent of follow the money. It's you want to see where the source data are. And anybody who has a legitimate argument, the source data will ring true when you look at it. It'll be buttressed. You'll say, yes, they are fairly representing the material. They know their stuff, because the more you look, the more you realize, yeah, that's actually true. And it improves your understanding of things. It doesn't mean that anybody can't make a mistake. I can make a mistake. I'm not infallible, and I have screwed up on several things. And I make a point of explaining my mistakes, because you want to learn from them to avoid doing them again. And that's where a rigorous method comes in. But twats who come up and try to dislodge evolution based upon that, well, buckaroo, that poor little Dr. Mustache is just way far behind the curve. He ain't cutting it.
I'll actually admit one mistake I did in drafting, and someone else caught it and called me out. I'm like, oh, wow. Yeah, I mean, looking back, yeah, it's embarrassing. I made this really dumb mistake, but the people, who watch this, they can get a laugh out of it. A team project I was on, I apparently tried to install a roof 3 feet above the roof line. So the roof was literally floating in midair.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, it's easy to do. You get everybody, even the most brilliant of scientists. That's another reason why it's fascinating to study the creation evolution case, because there are many examples of extremely brilliant people who have suddenly suffered from cranial blockage of the rectum, and you can see exactly how they do it. They're often people who come into a field from another field entirely. So they're the astrophysicists deciding to weigh in on paleontology. And they think they understand it, but they haven't really looked at primary source material. They're just kind of riffing off vague hypotheses. And they start crashing and burning an awful lot in those contexts. Interlopers, most of the people in the anti-evolution movement are interlopers. They're not actually in their own fields of inquiry. And the few that do, you can observe how much information they present and how much not, how well they deal with sources. At a source methods level, everything is like putting a floodlight on it. And stupid will never survive a source methods test, because you're going to see where all of the rotten foundations are.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, it's just, like I said, it's all just.
No, Don in the live chat said, will you be doing more of his videos? Please say no. You are better than that.
At least, okay, Don, at least one more video will be done on this guy, only for the reasoning of, I mean, there's another, evolution video he does in response to Vice Rhino, or not Vice, but I mean Professor Stick. If you, if you feel up to it, RJ, we can
I would suggest you put a challenge out to him that if he is not a Poe, if he is just a legitimate idiot, he should have the gumption to come on a live chat like this, and we could thrash out his method clearly and honestly, because any idea worth having is one worth defending. And if he is not a Poe, he should be willing to do that. And we'll see how well he can fare on these kinds of things, and tell him, can the mustache.
Yeah. And it's, and with that, but I think that, the only video, to answer, Don's real question is, I cited a lot of verses at him when he, on one video, actually on Paul's thing, where he, where he was saying, oh, well, what's your sources? And I gave him exactly for everything I said. And he tries to go through and say that it's not what it says, even though it clearly is what it says.
Yeah. In which case, that's not at all unusual in biblical apologetics or any other apologetics. You can find that Dinesh D'Souza, where he clearly can't seem to read a source. And occasionally one of the people who will be defending him, they'll actually have the source under their eyeballs and they can't seem to understand what the text says. Don Michaud says it's funny, legit idiot. I actually mean that, because that would be an example of a Tortucan. They may believe absolute twaddle, but they honestly believe it. They're not lying to you. They're not dissembling. They're telling you something they sincerely believe is true, but it happens to be complete ass crap. And if you look at people who believe those sorts of things that are legitimate idiots, they'll always be falling apart at the source methods level. You'll be able to observe how people can construct a completely fabricated argument and how they can be so trusting of that argument. They'll be overly reliant on secondary sources. That's the first point. They don't fact check them. Second, whatever people they're relying on are only paying attention to a tiny slice of the data field. And in the anti-evolution thing, they're missing like 90% of the data. Don Michaud has asked RJ, what do you think about Krauss using the word nothing? It's legitimate. I attended a lecture from Krauss here in Spokane. He was part of the EWU series that had brought in just tons of people. And I got to say, his lecture was more informative than his bloody book was. Thank you, Cap, for putting links up to my books. Yes, everyone buy them. They are wonderful books, and the author needs the royalties. Anyway, Krauss was explaining more about what he means by nothingness, about the quantum reality. Particles pop in and out of existence in quantum physics all the time. We see that in the actual accelerator work in that, and virtual particles that just flash into being and disintegrate. And this generates a whole bunch of stuff that, in effect, universes can do that. And some of the universes, theoretically, are going to be ones that have very stable conditions, and they sort of freeze. And that's what we see in ours. So there's a hell of a lot of technical material on there that he was actually explaining much more clearly, because he was also bringing in cutting edge material that had come out since his book, that I found that more illuminating this bloody book.
Yeah. And yeah, there you go, RJ. I plugged, I think, every...
Thank you for the plugs.
I think
they can help in any way.
And obviously the link to your channel is down in the description. Every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Central, 5 p.m. Pacific.
Yeah, my evolution hour.
Evolution hour.
Yeah, there is a I'm hoping that someone has offered to send me the latest book by Sanford, who's the genetic entropy idiot. He's a young Earth creationist, and he apparently has just written a book that I didn't know about on fossils with a co-author who's probably also a young Earth creationist. And I couldn't see any blurbs on it because they don't have an open access thing. There's no preview up at Amazon. But anyway, the guy said he didn't want to read it himself. He didn't have the time, but he offered to buy it for me and send it to me if I would then be able to do analysis in that of it. And it says, oh boy, I'd do some evolution hours on that. So that would be just delightful, because we could actually show exactly how I approach a fresh data field. And I'm just itching to see what he has to say about fossils. Holy moly. Woohoo.
Yeah. You're going to have fun with that.
I'll just explain the meaning of the links. The evolution slam dunk is on the reptile mammal transition, and it's a complete survey of not only that technical field, but all examples, I mean all of them, of anti-evolutionists who have ever bumped into the reptile mammal transition. It's not a lot. It's only about 20 people, but boy, are they stupid. And you've started to look through it, so you can give your opinion.
Really good. Like I said, if you had to ask me for one knock, just if I had to find one thing that I had to say I do not like about Evolution Slam Dunk, is at a few points it reads like a textbook. And it can be kind of, okay, here we go.
I was straddling a boundary because I wanted it to be a work where if you are a professionally trained scientist, you're going to be able to find the resources there at your level. And I know that that's worked because Christine Janis, who's a mammal paleontologist, she had already bought the book. You can read a review there at Amazon. And she was finding information in it that she didn't know about in her own field. And I felt, okay, I'm doing my job. Alrighty. Now, the next one, Paralogs of Phileas Fogg, that's a novel. And Cap is also reading that one.
Yeah, and I need to finish it soon. You know, I keep starting it, and then I keep getting busy with things, and then I keep kind of working on actually my own novel. And then I go back to it, I'm like, great, what happened before this? I got to reread this chapter. And I'm like, okay, so I am slowly but surely. I am still at chapter 4. I've not got past chapter 4, but it is really good. Mm-hmm. And the really cool thing about RJ is, if you get his books, when you do, you can get a hold of him on Twitter, and he can, he will, if you mail them to him, he will autograph them, and he will send them back to you, as he did with two of mine. That I wonder
whether or not, in the dim distances of time, the autographed first editions of these books may actually be worth more than you spent for them. We'll see about that. But yeah, I'm almost through with the chapter sketches for the second Phileas Fogg novel. That one's I'm having a lot of fun with. And so there's going to be a whole series of those. And then there'll also be more science books, because after I finish the Fogg novel, then I'm going to be doing a thing on the Discovery Institute's Descent from Darwin, which no one's done. I'm basically targeting subjects that have not been properly covered before, and doing in the full court press analysis thing, so you'll have a completely up-to-speed picture on it. And then later on, the third science book's going to be on speciation and kinds, baraminology and all of that, because that's a big, fun subject, and it's a huge Achilles heel in all of anti-evolutionism.
I did actually find someone who gave a definition of kind. Really did. It's species.
In which case, they don't read the creationist literature, because it's hard pressed to find a creationist who will define a kind as a species. There's only one example of something that is a species that's got to be its own kind, and that's us. We have got to be our own kind. But everything else generally operates at the traditional level of family. The family level is the traditional definition of kind, and that, by some weird coincidence, is where most creationists end up. At that level, and then sometimes it's even higher at the order and class level and phyla in some cases. But try to find a list of kinds, not a number, not a guesstimate, but an actual list. There ain't one. None of them, even ones who come up with abstract numbers and all over the place. Answers in Genesis, I think, is just hilarious. Because for the Ark encounter, they're claiming that there are about 1,500 created kinds aboard. And at Answers in Genesis's own website, another creationist is guesstimating 8,500 kinds. Well, that's a hell of a difference. And even at that, neither one of them have a list. So you don't know what's on the list and what not. They're just ballparking this crap. And at the moment they try, in the Slam Dunk, you'll read about the one and only study that was done of the reptile mammal transition one. And boy, Aaron, 2014, boy, that one is sad.
Yeah. The guy who said it was species is a guy who goes by the name, and Don, I think you're the only one in the chat because it's only showing one viewer. I think so. I think you're the only one left remaining. Yeah, poor Don by himself. But goes by the name of Vigilant Christian.
Apparently not vigilant enough to study.
And he goes, well, it was, you can't get different kinds, although I prefer the term species.
Yeah, you see, he's reflecting grassroots creationism, because anti-evolutionists of all stripes are so vague on this subject that what it means is that in the grassroots, they think speciation doesn't happen, that nothing happens, that anything above speciation is the forbidden macroevolution, and therefore that's beyond a kind. So it's a confusion that's completely understood. Oh, somebody brought up Arthur Wallace. That's the co-discoverer of.
That was like, correct me on the name. All right, never mind. Sorry. I was. All right, never mind. I wasn't sure on that. All right, go ahead, RJ. Take it. Do you know more?
Anyway, we're slipping along in here, so we've done this poor schnook to death. Anyway, so the speciation issue, that confusion is very understandable at the grassroots level, because anti-evolutionists are muddlingly confused on it. They are terrible at offering examples. They routinely offer only generic barnyard animals. You say, well, dogs and cats, the things they're familiar with, cows. They're not talking about how many kinds there are in chinorynchs or nematodes or therapsids. So all of the fossil and existing animals, most of it's off their scope. And it's because none of them are paleontologists, virtually none of them. None of them really study the material in detail. But intelligent designers and old Earth creationists don't think about this at all, because they don't need to. They don't have the imperative young Earth creationists do. Young Earth creationists have to book Noah's Ark. They have to figure out what's on board and how what was on board got to be what we observe now. And so they've got to deal with the current speciation relative to it. So they have to have fixed kinds created that are small enough in number that they can cram them on the Ark. And then those existing kinds have to proliferate like super rabbits to get into the existing species that we have now. Leitner, and I mentioned this in, I think along the way in the book, and also in the tip site about Leitner's 2013 study of bird kinds. And I think she came up with like 186 kinds, something like that. One of the kinds is the finch kind, which means 1,200 species of finch, including all the Galapagos finches. So in effect, she's conceding the paternity suit that the Darwin's finches are a modified version of some pre-existing kind, exactly what evolutionists insist. The horse sequence is another one that the creationists have accepted. And yet you'll find creationists to this day insisting there's some problem with the horse evolution sequence. Excuse me, read Todd Wood. It's 10 years old. They've already conceded it. So a lot of creationists don't actually even pay attention to their own side stuff. That's absolutely hilarious. And I'm wanting to get everybody up to speed where not only do they know about our side's science data, but we know what their side says better than they do. And it allows us to drop anvils and pull trapdoors way better.
Yeah. It's like I said, it's just, these people are just, they're a little laughable, but it's almost sad with how, pathetic they are. And I don't like using the term pathetic, but there's no other way to put it.
Don asks, Arthur wants to know how bears poofed into existence. Yeah, well, if you're a creationist, young Earth creationist, they would have been created on day 5, I think, of creation, the day after birds on day 4. And then I think, in fact, there's a baraminology thing that's gone into some of the bears where they try to deal with. And they're relatively easy to deal with, at least if you leave off all the fossil data. So if you're just looking at existing kinds, they can kind of squish them together because they're all bearish. So they don't have a problem with things that look bear-like. But then if you try to find out what's going on in the intelligent design argument, or old Earth creationists, where they would have to deal with all of that map of time sequence of bear fossils, they just don't think about it. It's just not on their scope.
Yeah, it was light was day 1. The separating of the waters in the firmament was day 2.
With
day
God
3
resting after every day. Yeah.
God, day 3 was the separating the land from the oceans.
And he makes plants along with the earth.
Came in. The 4th day was the stars,
sun, moon, and stars.
Was where the flying animals and the fish were formed. I believe, let waters bring forth abundantly moving creatures that have life and fowls, and then from there,
humans either by ribectomy for women or not, depending upon which version you read.
Yeah,
isn't that clear? And some of the stuff. There's a guy, a Jewish Kabbalistic astrophysicist guy, Gerald Schroeder, and you may or not have heard of him, but he pops up in some of the apologetic literature, particularly over on the design side. Anyway, Gerald Schroeder was trying to create a logarithmic scale to corroborate the Genesis story. So he has all the days of creation on this logarithmic scale. And he tries to argue that it's absolutely accurate, just wonderfully accurate. I went into, I think, one of the footnotes in the old tip chapters. I can't remember which one right off the bat. But anyway, the fun part is that, boy, does he have to leave out stuff. Because no matter how you do it, the obvious example is the day 4 sun and the moon, is that he uses exactly the same dodge that some creationists do. And for that matter, Uras, that the Earth's atmosphere was cloudy. So they couldn't see the sun, moon, and the stars. And then it cleared up on that day, wherever they figure out on the sequence. And it's a place of misplaced concreteness, because who the hell was there to see it? This was long before there were people. What, the little bacteria looking up and oh, the skies are clear with the eyes they don't have. God presumably would know what the sequence was. So why go through this rigmarole? Well, it's all to wriggle around the fact that that's the version that the Babylonians had. The sun and the moon and all that is created on the 4th day of creation, according to the Enuma Elish, their myths. And the Jews just picked this up and dusted it off and got rid of Marduk and all the Babylonian gods and put in Yahweh instead. So it was not merely a mistake. It wasn't even their mistake. They were copying somebody else's mistake.
And RJ, and on that, I would actually add that the Genesis 1, when it became Genesis 1, which Genesis 2 was actually originally Genesis 1, which is why you have the 2 different stories, the Babylonians had the Jews put in their myth and their stuff to kind of keep the rulers and the subjects, believe semi-together enough to kind of keep it, I guess, peaceable.
Well, it
From what
may
I
even not have been forced. It may have been a thing where, remember, they spent a great deal of time in that Babylonian captivity, and it was very traumatic for the culture. And part of the reasons, there's a section in Dynamania on the flood story as to why the story is the version it is in the Bible, because of the experiences that they had in Babylon, where basically the Jewish people were carted off and like, what, has God forsaken us? That it created the notion that God had a kind of lofty indifference and inscrutability to him, and that God's ways are totally mysterious, and don't bitch about it. God's in charge, and if he does something that really is nasty, Isaiah, the book of Isaiah, where he says that God's responsible for everything, good and evil, is responsible for all the bad things too. That's not a Christian concept. By that time, you get that Zoroastrian notion of a god and an anti-god, lightness versus darkness, that starts creeping in and builds up some of that in the Essenes and other cultures in that time that predate Christianity. So now you've got the idea that the good stuff is done by God and the bad stuff is from the evil Satan type. Then there's a battle between good and evil, and there's going to be a triumph and there's an end. That's a very Ahura Mazda style way of thinking, Zoroastrian way of thinking, rather than the stuff that in the Old Testament, where if shit happens, it's God's doing because God's in charge, shut up, which was more the Old Testament view.
Yeah, and it's the verse in question, if I remember correctly. Where's his NIV?
Yeah, somewhere in Isaiah. I've created God. I'm responsible for good.
I formed the. Okay, that's not the one that says it, but I think it's actually the King James. Actually, it's the one that you really get that. There's
anyway, the thing is that the religion evolved, and Christianity evolved over Judaism, and Mormonism and Islam evolved out of Christianity and their cultural frames as well as Judaism. So everybody's feeding off one another, and then everybody keeps on thinking that they got the correct version.
Yeah. In Isaiah 45:7, for anybody who wants to know what it says, I form the light and create darkness. I make peace and create evil. I am the Lord, do all these things.
So, which was a logical thing to do. If he's an absolute, omniscient, totally in charge thing, nothing happens without his say-so. Exactly. And so if things are going bad, it's part of his inscrutable will that it happened as so. And this, you get into this same problem when people start talking in the Christian context about certain people being blessed or not. You know, it's, oh, the wonderful thing, Donald Trump has been elected president, God has anointed him, and so forth and so on. Well, apparently God also wants Richard Dawkins' books to be on the bestseller list. I mean, you know, let's figure this out.
Yeah, and I've, only way I can describe it is it's the best scapegoat. Well, God's just testing you, or, oh, God's blessing you. It's a win-win for them.
It's always what they want to be true. The hurricane hits Florida, and Pat Robertson said it's because of gay people. Well, why isn't it because there's G. James Kennedy? So why is it that you think you know what it is that God is doing in causing earthquakes or pestilence or anything else? They always filter it into what their expectations are. They don't have a standard. They only have a convenience. So whatever they want it to be is what they want it to be. And I suspect our little Mr. Mustache falls into exactly that category. And it'll be like nailing Jello to a wall. And I suspect he will not want to come in for a live chat.
I'll send him this link to this live stream, and I'll tell him, would you be willing to come in and talk with RJ? I'll moderate it.
Yeah, at a time of his convenience, we can be very, very open-ended on these things and make it at every opportunity, because if you have an idea worth having, is one worth defending.
Exactly, and and I actually know why God would bless Richard Dawkins to be on the bestseller list. I can answer that. I know, because God is giving him his blessings now because he has turned from him. Yet he'll also give atheists cancer because they're atheists. And
of course, the busload of poor Sunday school kids plunging off of mountain passes and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, God has a lot of inscrutability thing, and he's a real rib tickler. Look at that Alzheimer's disease. Ain't that a laugh?
Yeah. He's like I said, it's a laughable thing, but I think that's really all I think we're just kind of rambling on. this
Well,
topic.
we've had an hour and a half of dissection of our little pal. I have to resume my universe here and continue with my work. And hope it was a fun chat, that everyone enjoyed it.
So thank you everyone who has joined us tonight. This is Cat Brony signing
And this
off.
is Wacky RJ.
Yep. Have a good night.